You might not know this, but video games are good. I like them. And while it's easy to get bogged down in the industry's controversies, the simple fact is that so many good video games come out every year that narrowing it down to 10 can be a real struggle. I played a lot of great games this year. Some of them were indie, and some of them were major AAA titles. Some were story-driven experiences, and some were incredibly challenging. Some were weird as hell, and some delivered a perfect execution of a tried and true formula. But the thing that every game on this list has in common is that it surprised and delighted me in some way. Because when you're constantly completing games, it can be easy to lose that feeling and get consumed by the grind. But this year's games reminded me that there's really no such thing as a bad year for video games. Because it's such a vast medium that there's always going to be something that I'm into. As a reminder, this list is mine and mine alone. Leave your top 10 games in the comments down below, and hey, maybe check out a few lists from other commenters down there too. You might find a new favorite game to check out. With that in mind, here are my top 10 games of 2019.
Number 10.
With the latest installment of the beloved Borderlands franchise, Borderlands 3 is bold and defiant in its absolute refusal to even attempt a reinvention of the wheel. You play this game because you're signing up for more Borderlands, and at every turn, that's exactly what this game gives you. More guns, more boss fights, more planets, more explosions, and more crude-ass jokes that are unexpectedly hilarious. Instead of trying out any new fancy mechanics or flipping the script on what you think you know about Borderlands, the third installment just goes bigger and better in every way. And you know what? Good. People play these games because they're looking for a very specific vibe. And while innovation is great, there's also nothing wrong with sticking with what works. And if you've enjoyed the previous two games, which I very much have, then you're pretty much guaranteed to love this one, which I very much did. I cackled and blasted my way through Borderlands 3, just like I did the first two. And just like I will through the inevitable sequels.
Number 9.
When you complete as many games as I do, it's a rare treat to find one that really tests you. And let me tell you, me and my skills were tested to the extreme by Ukulele and the Impossible Lair. Now let me get this out there real quick before we continue on. Ukulele and the Impossible Lair is not DLC for Ukulele. It is a brand new game, which is a common complaint people don't understand. Ukulele and the Impossible Lair was a test that I was happy to throw myself at over and over again, because everything about this game feels like it was designed specifically for me. Because if there's anything I love more than Banjo-Kazooie, it's Donkey Kong Country. So when I found out that Platonic Games was following up with their Banjo successor with a throwback to classic rare platformers, I was stoked beyond belief. And they nailed it. It was just the right amount of nostalgic warmth balanced by precise, challenging, and creative gameplay. Even the game's structure is dope, allowing you to attempt the titular Impossible Lair from the very beginning before you even got all your skills and upgrades, before you got all your tonics and such. And on top of all that, every level has an alternate variant, and the game features tonics that can modify the gameplay. It's a true throwback, but with an added layer of versatility. It's not content to just remind you of the Donkey Kong Country games, but instead attempts to truly update them into something modern and new. And while the Impossible Lair itself was super frustrating after a point, I admire any game that puts the word impossible in its title and then commits to it so hard. Like, what the hell? Jesus, you guys. Well done.
Number 8.
A lot of open-world single-player games can start to blur together, and anytime that one has a world or story that stands out amongst the crowd, it makes me sit up and notice. And when the gameplay is equally good, you can end up with something truly special. And I think that Control, the latest game from Remedy, is something truly special. It's got the same polish as their previous story-driven games like Alan Wake and Quantum Break, but with an explorable world that all happens to be contained in one infinitely large building. All of Control takes place in the oldest house, which is the headquarters for the Federal Bureau of Control, an organization dedicated to investigating supernatural occurrences. When the protagonist Jessie Faden walks into the building in search of her missing brother, she finds herself in the middle of an extra-dimensional invasion by an entity that she names the Hiss, and has to take them down with a mysterious shape-shifting pistol called the Service Weapon. God, if you don't know anything about this game and just hearing that for the first time, it sounds like everyone is on drugs. The vibe of this game borrows from stuff like X-Files and Twin Peaks, but ends with a tone that I've never really seen in a video game game before. It's mysterious and weird and incredibly compelling. The gameplay almost doesn't even need to be that good, but it's a really solid third-person shooter, even before you get powers that let you fling objects at enemies and hover over the battlefield. Control is a game that truly feels mysterious and unknowable, and I am stoked that there's DLC on the way, because I could keep exploring the oldest house forever. It's the oldest house, you guys. There's no house that's older.
Number 7.
Sometimes you pick up the new installment of a series and you know exactly what you're in for. And when you pick up a Devil May Cry game, you know full well that you're signing up for fast-paced, stylish combat, all presented with a tongue-in-cheek swagger as you slice through hordes of demons. And Devil May Cry 5 does not disappoint. While I personally did not mind the DMC reboot as much as everyone else did, I actually thought it was super fun. It's definitely nice to revisit the classic versions of characters like Dante, Virgil, Lady, and Trish. But the biggest new addition is V, a new character who fights from afar using 3 demon pals who do all the dirty work for him. In fact, Devil May Cry 5's biggest achievement is just how different all 3 of the playable characters feel from one another. Dante mixes up his combat by rapidly switching between weapons and styles. Nero pulls in enemies to attack with his Devil Breaker arms, and V balances risk and reward by having to close in for the kill while avoiding damage until the enemies are near death. And although everyone's going to have a preference, all 3 of them are super fun. The DMC series doesn't need any more reinventing, but DMC 5 proves that Capcom has not run out of ways to keep this long-running series fresh, fun, and stylish.
Number 6.
Some people love Star Wars. Some people love to hate Star Wars. And some people just want to be transported by a game, whether it makes them feel like Spider-Man, the Jedi, or an asshole Goose. And the latest Star Wars game, Respawn's Jedi Fallen Order, may not make you feel like a Goose, or like Spider-Man for that matter, but it definitely makes you feel like a Jedi. Even more impressive, though, is that it does so through genuinely difficult, interesting combat, rather than just handing you a lightsaber and some force powers and sending you out into the world. All the Star Wars elements are very well implemented, and the worlds and creatures that the player encounters are super cool and weird. But the best part is that all this stuff is in service of a fundamentally solid game. Jedi Fallen Order, like many other difficult games released in the last few years, has gotten a lot of comparisons to Dark Souls, but it's way more friendlier and accessible. And that's good, because it's Star Wars. Jedi Fallen Order wants to be a challenge, but it also wants to let you tailor that challenge to your playstyle, so it's still, fun. And while the combat is hard and requires some thought, it also just feels good to slice through 12 stormtroopers like the hapless chumps that they are. It feels nice to get a good Star Wars game that's this good, and it went a long way towards reminding me why I love Star Wars, while still reinventing what lightsaber combat feels like.
Number 5.
But while Jedi Fallen Order made me feel like a Jedi, there was only one game this year that made me feel like the most powerful creature of all, an asshole Goose with nothing to lose. An Untitled Goose game easily made me laugh harder than any other game released in 2019. Untitled Goose game gives you a list of Goose tasks to accomplish, and the game really excels in allowing you to be creative. Once you figure out the behavior loops of the townsfolk, you can basically ruin their entire lives, and it is so much fun! Playing Untitled Goose Game with my friends was pure gaming bliss. In fact, it's easy to see why the internet latched onto this game so hard, because it's an endless bit generator. Something funny happens every couple of minutes, and the simple pleasure of playing a game where the only goal is to mess with people never gets old. And I know that there are an endless number of great indie games out there, some of them with truly bizarre premises, but Untitled Goose Game works because it zeroes in on an incredibly specific concept and then pushes it further than you knew was possible. Ever wanted to get the feeling of roaming an untamed land as a cowboy? Great, you can now play Red Dead Redemption games. Want to feel the air whip past you as you swing through Manhattan? Go be Spider-Man. But if your dream is to be a medium-sized waterfowl filled with malice and unchecked aggression, then there is literally only one game for you, and that, my friends, is Untitled Goose Game. Honk!
Number 4.
There's nothing quite like an old-fashioned beat-em-up. And while the genre isn't nearly as prevalent as it once was, my love for it was revived by WayForward's incredibly badass River City Girls. Technically a spin-off of the long-running Kunio-kun franchise, River City Girls starts with a deceptively simple premise and then takes off running. When their boyfriends are kidnapped, high schoolers Misako and Kyoko set off to, get them back. And that's it. The combat also seems like a typically simple beat 'em up at first, but it's constantly revealing neat little details. The moves are easy to execute, but can be strung together in ways that reward experimentation. And there are constant twists on the beat 'em up formula, like the ability to recruit and then summon certain enemies, or bosses who pay homage to other games and genres. But really, this game's greatest achievement is just how hype it is. Everything about it makes me feel amped. The art style, the combat, the extremely talented voice cast that just so happens to be filled with a lot of my friends. It all just feels so dope and makes me want to keep playing, especially the music, which goes way harder than it has any reason to, and it's probably my favorite soundtrack of the year. This game just gets me so pumped up, and it's especially true in co-op mode, which is how it's truly meant to be played. Getting amped up with a buddy and fighting your way through endless goons to a sick-ass soundtrack is exactly what I wanted from a game like this. And River City Girls delivers.
Number 3.
I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Jedi Fallen Order that it takes the fundamentals of the Soulsborne games and makes them accessible to a wider audience. And that's great, but the same absolutely cannot be said about Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Sekiro is hard. Like, extremely goddamn hard. But it might have one of my favorite learning curves of all time. Every bit of improvement is earned through hard work and careful attention to the enemies and environments. And when I found myself getting better, I felt a genuine sense of pride. This is a game that's all about precision. And while it stripped away the customization found in From Software's previous games, it replaced those options with the specificity not found in their other games. There are still some upgrades and ways to customize your play style, but it's always going to come down to core combat mechanics like the posture meter, which can be filled up to enable some of the dopest and most satisfying finishing moves I've ever seen in a game. The combat in Sekiro has the same general feeling as the other games, but with an increased focus on specific moments. Because the world and the story feel so much more grounded and alive in this game, it also helps every single combat encounter feel like it matters, even when it's just a lowly soldier. You still have to take the time to figure out what his deal is if you want to bring him down. And then you throw stealth on top of it, and it's clear that From's ability to experiment and evolve with each game is why they keep churning out masterpiece after masterpiece. Sekiro is a game about discipline, and it teaches you that discipline as you play, growing and learning as a player with each and every encounter. I played this game 4 freaking times, and I never felt like I stopped learning things about it. It's an incredibly impressive feat of game design, and I'm thinking about it pretty much all year long.
Number 2.
You know what else I've been thinking about lately? Tetris. Everybody loves Tetris. It's a true classic, but it's not exactly what you'd call new. And while the craze of battle royale games like PUBG and Fortnite is relatively new, pairing it up with a decades-old puzzle game hardly seems like an obvious choice. And yet, Tetris 99 was born. As a game, Tetris isn't broken and doesn't need to be fixed, messed with, or even tweaked, but when dropped into a brand new context, something magical happened. And I cannot tell you how many hours I sank into playing Tetris 99 this year, and how crazy that would have sounded to me even just a year ago. But every time I thought I was done playing for the day, Tetris 99 would pull me back in to try and last even longer, because watching the other players drop away as they fall before my Tetris prowess is just so satisfying. And satisfying is probably the best way to describe this game. Like the feeling of watching a block fit perfectly into a spot as if that's where it was always meant to be. Tetris 99 just scratched this gaming itch at the back of my brain. I've always loved the idea of battle royale games, but most of them haven't impressed me. Until Tetris came along and made me realize that the format is way more versatile than I thought it was, and that no matter what, Tetris will always be a timeless classic. And while it's kind of cheating to put a classic like Tetris near the top of my list, I regret nothing. It's a great game, and it's new enough, and they put new skins and new modes all the time. Leave me alone. This game is the definition of huge plays.
Number 1.
Speaking of new enough, that brings me to my absolute favorite game of 2019, what just so happens to be a remake of a game from 1998. It's fine, time is meaningless and nothing means anything. But if there is one thing that I know, it's that there's not a single game that I had more fun with in 2019 than the remake of Resident Evil 2. It's a remake in the truest sense of the word, taking the spirit and the story of the original game and revamping it so completely that it feels brand new, like the best modern survival horror game you could ask for. And it's true that it borrows the over-the-shoulder style the series had once used in Resident Evil 4, and It is built off the engine from Resident Evil 7, but if you have any attachment to Resident Evil 2, which I definitely do, that little bit of familiarity really pushes it over the top. And one of the most impressive things about the RE2 remake is the way that it is multiple satisfying experiences all in one terrifying package. I got the survival horror experience on my first couple of runs through the game, where the vibe and atmosphere were working overtime to freak me out every time a zombie jumped out at me, which was, oh, you know, all the goddamn time. But once the shocks had worn off, I then got an involving completion experience later on. I now knew where things were and had a pretty good sense of what was going to happen, but the gameplay is so strong that it didn't feel like I had lost the horror so much as the game just shifted its strengths. This is a game I see myself going back to over and over again in the future. Not just because it's a relatively quick experience that I can jump into if I want a spooky evening, but because it genuinely feels timeless. By staying so faithful to the original, while also doing so much innovating, Resident Evil 2 Remake unites gaming's past with its future. And in that sense, it's fitting that my favorite game of the year was a remake, because as video games move forward and leans harder into nostalgia while also trying to push forward, Resident Evil 2 Remake will stand tall as the best of both worlds, and the very best that 2019 had to offer. And if you're paying attention, Resident Evil 3 Remake is coming out in 2020, so Happy New Year to us. So there you have it, everyone. Those are my top 10 favorite games of 2019. And while every year is going to have its ups and downs, if you pay attention and stick around in a couple of days, you'll be seeing my top 10 worst games of 2019, so get hyped for that, my friends. At the very least, before we sign out today, I just want to give a quick thank you to all of you at home who've been supporting us this year. It has been a very long, trying, and difficult year, and without your guys' support, we would not be able to be here doing what we're doing. So thank you for supporting The Completionist, where we don't just beat the games, we complete them.